Newly retired offensive tackle Terron Armstead hopped on ESPN this morning and revealed his big three Miami Dolphins that are the key to a no-limits season in 2025. Who made his list, plus an update on Tyreek Hill, and more here on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Little bit of a smorgasbord of things for us to get into here today on the show. We're going to get into Tyreek Hill and his race against Noah Lyles. We're getting into Terron Armstead and his ESPN appearance this morning, in which he had some comments that I think kind of echoed, if you polled internally, members of last year's team and kind of the ways in which things went sideways. There's some context clues there that I think are pretty relevant that we're going to get into as well in the show. And then also, in honor of Deshaun Elliott, former Dolphin safety, getting a new contract extension with the Steelers yesterday, that was announced. I want to revisit Deshaun's comments about the Dolphins being soft from 23. And the one problem I have with that stigma existing still in 2025. And we'll get into that at the end of this show. And nothing's going to change from a stigma and a stereotype perspective until you individually change it. And I understand that. But let's start with Terron Armstead. Because Terron hopped on ESPN, on one of their morning programs, and talked about his career, his retirement. Unsurprisingly, was asked about Tua Tagovailoa. And then Terron gave some insight on who are kind of the X factors for what this season's going to ultimately become in whatever way it ultimately ends up going. So I want to read the quote from Terron. And he was asked about, for Dolphins fans and NFL fans, why they should feel as though Tua Tagovailoa can be the long-term answer at the quarterback position for the Dolphins. Terron said, I wholeheartedly believe in Tua. I believe in his ability. I've seen him snap into a mode that was familiar to me from Drew Brees. That's why I have no problem making that comparison. The consistency of that, him snapping into that assassin mode, that sniper mode, that's that championship DNA that we want to see more consistently. I believe he can do it. I believe we can keep him upright up front. I believe the Dolphin season comes down to Tua's availability and if we can get Bradley Chubb and Jaelen Phillips healthy on the defense. I think those two guys healthy with Chop Robinson, it changes the whole dynamic of the team. Terron was asked as a follow-up, if that happens, like what's your vision for the ceiling of the Dolphins? Is it playoffs? Is it competing for the division? Whatever. If we get those three factors, those three guys I named, there's no limit to me. I feel that strongly. Is what Terron Armstead had to say. Now, there's a lot of unknown about this Dolphins team with all the changing parts. That's a sneak peek to segment 3 of today's show. But some of the core pillars that continue to exist, you've seen them produce at a very high level, whether that's Tua or Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or Bradley Chubb, or Jaelen Phillips or Jordan Brooks last year or Zach Sealer. You have promise for the offensive line. Devon Achane's been a very productive player. Johnny Smith obviously is still here. So you have a lot of pieces individually that have had success, and how it all comes together is the team element of the game. But when you watch the tape from last season, and I just did Bradley Chubb on Sunday, on my Father's Day gift, is I got to go sit out in the garage and do an hour-long film study of Bradley Chubb pass rushes in 23 versus the guys who were charged with taking Bradley Chubb snaps in 24 and the discrepancies and differences. And that's up on Touchdown Miami on Substack if you want to go watch that. It's about 53 minutes long. It's a good Father's Day present for me to get just go sit out in the garage and do a little film work. But I would be willing to bet that you could poll almost anybody internally and their feedback just based off of what the film looks like for those guys when they're healthy, just based off of how they have had a voice in the offseason program this year. And both Brad and Jaelen have kind of left some breadcrumbs as far as the changing dynamics of the defense. And everybody's getting tired that they're talking right now. And I understand why. Because we want to see you do. We don't want to hear you talk. But all they can do right now is talk. And they're getting asked about it anytime a microphone's put in front of somebody's face. They're asked about it nonstop. So they are talking the talk, and it's all you can do right now, and we'll see what it looks like when the chips are down and you start playing for keeps in September. But Jaelen Phillips, I think, had a very damning quote about the guys who were in the leadership positions last year in being there based off of name, not based off of what time they get to the facility and what time they leave the facility, and so on and so forth. And Alec Ingold had a comment about the friction of communication and how that's been removed. And I've kind of alluded to some things that I heard about the early season start and how hard it was for players with all the new players and pieces and veterans from different places. There was kind of this, I don't want to say struggle, but not everybody was on the same page as far as giving feedback and giving criticism and communicating with one another about getting on the same page. And that's when Bradley Chubb comes straight out and says, yeah, we lied to you last year when we said we were all invested in each other and whatnot. I believe him because of what I had heard, some of the lengths that the team leadership had to go to just try to get everybody to chill out and get on the same page about as far as, hey, if somebody screws up here, we got to be able to talk about it. And we got to figure out what happened and why. The players in Chubb and Phillips, the voice that they've had in the pre-draft process, plus the on-field impact that healthy versions of those two players can bring. I believe Terron Armstead when he says those two guys with Chop Robinson changes the whole dynamic of the team. And I'm sure he's just talking about the talent of the pass rush and secondary's going through a transition and how that's going to fit with a front that you're betting big on these guys being healthy, and it is a big bet. And having your season's big three guys be riding on three guys that the last 3 years have had two combined out of a possible 9 seasons in which they've played all 17 games it's a risky bet. But it's the bet that this Dolphins team is placing based off of who we think are the right players that we have under contract and who's available to us and who can we get back that we didn't have for more than 3.5 games from these two guys combined last year that are needle-moving players. These are the players that the Dolphins are betting on. And Terron Armstead thinks if you get all three of Tua Tagovailoa, Bradley Chubb, and Jaelen Phillips healthy, the sky's the limit for the roster based on the other players in place that are needle-moving players, and then the ancillary and complementary players around them on either side of the football. But Terron's comments about Tua, I thought were particularly interesting because he was asked why should fans believe that Tua is the long-term answer in Miami. And his answer talked about, kind of getting into that mentality and mode as a quarterback that Terron himself, whose only other long-term quarterback that he had in his career outside of Tua Tagovailoa was Drew Brees. And if he sees those parallels, I'm not in a place to question Terron Armstead about it, and I don't think anybody that's listening or watching the show, unless you've also played with both guys and lived around them in the building and played and understand everything that those guys were asked to do on a down-by-down basis, Terron would know better than anybody. So I thought it was very complimentary of Terron and getting that perspective from a guy who's retired, right? It's not, he's under contract with the team and he's at a training camp press availability and he's going to give the answer that's the PR prepped answer. He's retired. He doesn't have to say any of this. And that carries a lot more weight for me to hear Terron give that kind of full-throated support to his former quarterback. That moves the needle for me. It really does. Now, we are going to get into an update on number 10 and his own individual offseason program. And that's coming your way next here on Locked on Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of playoff atmosphere that you want to experience in person for yourself. Or maybe you want to get to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals tonight. The Panthers hosting the Oilers, chance to close out the Cup on home ice. Gametime makes it fast and easy for you to get seats to all of the biggest playoff games, and they take the guesswork out of buying tickets because they have things like killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, no surprise fees. I love the no surprise fees, and I love the all-in pricing because there's nothing that's worse in my mind than seeing a price that I'm comfortable with, putting the tickets in my cart, going to check out, and now I'm effectively buying what's equal to a whole other ticket to the event in extra fees. Gametime takes that guesswork out of it, so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, terms do apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime app today. Last minute tickets with the lowest prices guaranteed. So Tyreek Hill, the race is off. Mercifully, the race with Noah Lyles is off. This came out today, this morning, really. Noah Lyles had talked to the New York Post about it. Tyreek obviously had the track event when she ran a 10.15 100 meter at 31 years old in his first official race in 11 years. And it's an incredible time for Tyreek Hill. It really is. Especially considering the background of Tyreek and what he does for a living and how long it's been since he's really been in that mode. But I wrote this story for A to Z at the end of last week. It was fun. You had your fun. Let's put it to bed. And you could tell based off the tonality of every opportunity that Mike McDaniel has had to be asked about this stupid race. He plays dumb. He has no time for it whatsoever. And it's the biggest concern you have with you and your organization talking about, we are going to get dialed in on football operations. And I'm really interested to see what other changes they're making to back that up. And for example, something that has my interest right now is the Dolphins on their website just made the public practice training camp dates available with the date and the time, and you can claim the tickets online. So I don't know if there's any left for any of the days that you would want to go individually. But if you're trying to go, now's the time to claim your tickets, right? Practices are starting at 9 a.m., according to the website. That's like an hour and a half earlier than what it had been before. And that is the kind of thing that's of interest to me because that's a change. Is that a change? Because a lot of the feedback around veteran players and those who observe practices is the intensity of practice, the physicality of practice, the strain of practice. They've been very science-oriented and all that kind of stuff. But the perception has been it does not breed the calluses that you need to get ready to play a season. And it's quite frankly not tough enough. Moving practice in South Florida up 90 minutes to start at 9 a.m. is of particular interest to me because I want to know, what does the earlier start, is there a correlation between the early start time and the strain and the effort and the intensity and the degree of difficulty of your practices? Because a 2-hour practice is now going to end at right about the time that the Dolphins' stretch period would be ending in special teams walkthroughs and installs at last year's training camp. So like there's kind of some of these context clues that maybe some of this kind of stuff is happening, and they're certainly talking like it's happening. But if you could talk all you want, if number 10's out there racing in Times Square against Noah Lyles after doing a California track meet and running the 10-1-5 and then doing the Noah could never with the paper after the fact. Like, it's fun, and it's an awesome time. It's an incredible athletic feat. But it was time to put this to bed, right? Like, you as Tyreek Hill, you just started being able to catch footballs for the first time all offseason since your wrist surgery, like last week at minicamp. And if that window is open for you now, are you really going to sit here and invest the time? Like, I don't have a problem with the fact that, like, he ran a race. It's like a guy going to the rec and playing basketball. But it's all of the extra that goes along with it and the time invested in trying to organize an event and negotiating pay splits and the time and travel that's involved. And, you know, I care more about, like, what are you doing to get back in the swing of things and catching footballs? And that's not to say you can't catch footballs on the jugs machine or play, have a throwing session and then go run at the track afterwards. But do you have a lot of faith that it's not going to be like a whole extra thing with Tyreek Hill? Because I don't. Because there's every offseason, there's always been extra stuff. And if you're authentically going to get traction with the football operations, focused on the football operation, and the stuff that you're doing outside the building can't take away from our preparation and coming in here and knowing what we're ready to do so we can put to practice the changes we're trying to make. Noah Lyles had to say we were very deep into creating the event. In fact, it was supposed to happen this weekend. This is courtesy of the New York Post. Unfortunately, there were some things, complications, personal reasons that it just didn't come to pass, and we're full on. We were going to have a big event. We were going to shut down the New York Times Square and everything. We were going to have all the billboards for the event. It was going to be a lot of fun. Now, Noah's definition of fun and mine are very different, because my definition of fun with Tyreek Hill is 80-yard touchdowns on Sundays, not a 100-meter dash in Times Square. And I get it's the time of year where you can do whatever you want to do. But mercifully, just put it to bed. I don't want to, there's been so much extra off-the-field stuff with Tyreek Hill. A chance to lie low, train, work the jugs machine as you can. Tua Tagovailoa was asked what he's doing with his time off before training camp. He said, I'm going to take a week off, and other than that, I'm working out, and we're doing throwing sessions with the guys. I want to know if Tyreek Hill is going to be a part of the guys. Are you able to be a part of the guys with your wrist recovery, or is that still kind of off limits and you're just working jug? Like, there's a lot of different ways that you could do it right. But where with this football team is at, and where Tyreek Hill was at personally last year, at the end of last year, being as mad as you were that you weren't showcased the way that you thought you were, even though you took some receptions and ran backwards and left yards on the field and then removed yourself from the second half of a game in which you were losing, in which you needed to throw the ball, and then complain after the game that you didn't get 1,000 yards for the season. You do all that and you want to show the world how great of a player you are. Put this time into practice to be the best version of yourself in 2025 that you could possibly be. And mercifully, because this event is off, you're going to be in a position to do that. Now, whether you actually do or not, who knows, right? But I want to finish today's show with a note courtesy of some work that I had done looking back at past rosters. And it came to the front of my mind again when Deshaun Elliott got a contract extension, because, of course, Deshaun Elliott was the player who last fall talked about how he played on a team that was soft as expletive in 2023, that, of course, being the Dolphins. And he alluded to the late season collapse and the loss against Tennessee, and how they never really rebounded off of that, even though they won their next two games, but then the injuries really piled up. And you are what your performance says you are, and the Dolphins were a team that has run up against better competition and physical teams that want to play physical with you, and they've struggled with those teams. So until that changes on the field, that's going to be the perception that exists around the Dolphins. But the only thing that I would ask is that we judge this team based off of this team's merits, as compared to allowing the Deshaun Elliott comments to carry into another year. And I want to get into why next here on Locked On Dolphins. So I looked at the 53-man depth chart for the Dolphins from December 1st of 2023. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at who's left. People talk about this team being soft. This team going back to that game against Tennessee and the game against Baltimore and the game against Buffalo week 18 with the skeleton crew that you had, and then the playoff game against Kansas City. It is the most anticlimactic ending to a season that I can remember in my lifetime. I was born in 89, right? Like, I wasn't there for those early 90s teams that had deep playoff runs in the AFC Championship. Like, I wasn't there for all that, right? My memories, my earliest memories, and just casually remembering seeing Dan on TV was like 95. That window, 95, 96, is kind of the window where, like, at first football really got its hooks in me, right? So those who are older listeners probably will have seasons in which it was more anticlimactic than what the Dolphins had for the first 3 months of the season in 23 versus what it finished at. But there are on the Dolphins 90-man roster right now, there are 16 members of the December 2023 53. 16 are on the 90-man right now. It's about 30%. And one of those names, Jalen Ramsey, is on the trade block to be moved. Will not be back with the football team. It's Jaylen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Keon Smith, who missed all of last year, Liam Eichenberg, who's back on a one-year vet minimum deal, Austin Jackson, then rookie Julian Hill, Tua Tagovailoa, Devon Achane as a rookie, Alec Ingold, Zach Sealer, Bradley Chubb, who missed all of last year, Channing Tindall, Cam Good, who were only on the roster because they were second-year draft picks, Cam Smith as a rookie, Elijah Campbell, Jalen Ramsey, Kader Kohu. That is it. You think about the secondary that year, Javon Holland, gone. Deshaun Elliott, gone. Xavier Howard, gone. The core of that group is gone. Jerome Baker and David Long at linebacker, gone. Jaelen Phillips was obviously on the team, but was on the injured reserve list. Names like Quentin Bell were there, but they were on the practice squad. Ethan Bonner was there, but on the practice squad. Same with Ezukama and Ryan Hayes. There's 30% of that 53-man roster is on the 90-man roster, and you go beyond that, and you project this year's roster for 2025. I'm not going to pick Cam Good to make the roster. I'm not going to pick Channing Tindall to make the roster. I'm not picking Ezukama or Ryan Hayes or Tanner Connor to make the roster. When it's all said and done after Jalen Ramsey gets moved on, you have a chance for 16 holdovers to make the 53 this year from the December of 2023 roster. And that's the timeline in the window in which Deshaun Elliott said the Dolphins were soft and fell apart as a team. This is not the 23 Dolphins. Now, they are going to pay for the sins of the 23 Dolphins and the 24 Dolphins and the 22 Dolphins and the 2020 Dolphins and the 2016 Dolphins and every team in between, the 13, 14, 15 years in which you collapsed at the end of the season. And that's part of the frustration with the fan base, right, is that you're paying for all of it. Longest route of winning the playoff game in the league right now. So there's understandably a lot of frustration. But I'm not going to label this team anything until I see them with a proof of concept. And this is all versus 23, even versus 24. The Dolphins returned the sixth lowest percentage of their roster from last season. It was under 64%. And of the players who left, 1 out of every 5 of those players is not on a team right now. That is the 5th highest figure of any team in the NFL for players who did not return to the team from last year. 5th highest percentage of players who did not find new homes at this point in the offseason. The teams that is behind is the Browns, the Jets, the Vikings, and the Titans. And 3 out of those 4 teams picked in the top 7 of last year's NFL draft, of this year's NFL draft. So, yes, The stigma exists. The stereotype exists, and I understand why it does. I am going to choose to let this team tell me who they are with their training camp intensity and how they meet the moment with their early season schedule, but then just as importantly, how they make decisions on the field to protect themselves if they're a player that has durability questions. And I'm going to allow them to, as the season gets deeper. September wins are super cool. October wins are cooler. November wins are even cooler than that. December wins are even cooler than that. And January wins are the bee's knees, right? Where do they get their wins? How many wins do they get? What's the manner in which they get their wins? How do they play teams that you perceive to be better? Like all of that, I want to see it before I ultimately make any firm judgments. Because you could have asked me this time last year, Kyle, where are the Dolphins of 2024 going to rank on your list of all-time least likable iterations of the Dolphins in your lifetime that you can remember? And I never in a million years would have said 2024 Dolphins is the least likable version of the Dolphins that I can remember. But that's how I felt at the end of the year. And that's I said that. I remember saying that. It was not a very likable team in a lot of ways last year. So I'm going to let this team tell me who they are and not get too married to the stigmas and the stench of 23 or 24, because relative to the rest of the league and relative to just raw numbers, whoever Deshaun Elliott had those problems with in 2023, there's about a 7 in 10 chance that those players are gone now already. So what do the players who are here do with their time? That's what I'm interested in. That is going to do it for us here today on the show, Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I am out of here. Go Fins.